Next up, we have Dave Newman. Newman recently won the Rattle Reader's Choice Award, and as if that wasn't enough, he scored a pushcart this year. Yay! Last year, Roadside published his short story collection, She Throws Herself Forward to Stop the Fall, and this year he's come back with a kick-ass poetry collection due out in June, Better Than the Best of American Poetry. Now available for pre-order at magicaljeep.com. Dave Newman, everybody.
There, I'm unmuted. Sorry about that. Thank you, Michelle, for having this and setting up. We really appreciate it. It's been wonderful working with Roadside. She's absolutely amazing. Thanks to all the other readers, and thanks everybody for showing up today. I'm going to start with a couple poems from a collection called the Poem Factory, and it's mostly about people looking for work and working bad jobs when they're young and trying to find their way in the world. And this one's called "Today I Almost Called McDonald's." Today, I almost called McDonald's to see about their manager training program, Hamburger U, as it was called in the one ads. Then I came to my senses, called the bank, and put a stop on the check that was supposed to be for my electric bill, because who needs light during summer? And it's July now, bright until late in the day. And besides, I worked for Burger King before, and I hated getting burned by fry grease, and the manager kept pinching my ass and being snide. So I settled back on the couch for a snooze, then sent out two resumes for jobs I'm not qualified for or I'm overqualified for, meaning I went to school forever, but never acquired a marketable skill because I thought attending school made me marketable. But instead, I got a job as a janitor, then a daycare worker, then I drove truck, and I once sold steroids to muscleheads, which makes my resume impossible to explain to the district manager of Bed Bath and Beyond, like I needed to do last month when he looked at me and said, "Why exactly would I hire you?" And I didn't have an answer for him, just like I don't know why I applied for those jobs today, because I really wouldn't want to manage a hardware store or a lumber yard, considering I'd never learned how to drive a nail in college, where they wanted me to read Foucault, which made me want to put my head in the oven or smoke a tailpipe in a locked garage. So I'm broke and not thinking rationally, and I wish someone paid for that because I'm great at it. Dreaming, I mean. But the bills keep piling up, and the lady from the student loan company says, "You really need to get straight with us," which was the problem to begin with, believing an education would get me straight when all it did was confuse everything and make me not want to work at anything but writing poems in my little apartment. And besides, what kind of company lends money to a guy who believes he can make a living writing poems in America? America doesn't read poems. We barely even share. This is a poem with a title that's actually longer than the poem. This is called "To the Woman in the Grocery Line Who Complains About the Man in Front of Us because he wears Nike shoes and pays for his groceries with food stamps." It is possible that he, like many intelligent consumers, bought the shoes on sale. This is really short also. This is called Johnstown, Pennsylvania. It's dedicated to my friend Adam Macho, who's also an excellent poet. The chief of police tasered his son at Thanksgiving dinner. This poem is called Fathers. It's from my first book of poems called The Slaughterhouse Poems, which is about kind of working in a slaughterhouse as a teenager and growing up in the 80s. And men were very rough back then, but very tender-hearted. And this is about all the dads and my friends and I shared. Fathers were broke and out of work and were ties to interviews where they didn't know what to say to other men in ties who'd read How to Win Friends and Influence People and paid $100 for the self-improvement seminar down at the convention center. Our father skipped the convention center and dragged us to Three River Stadium to watch the Pirates get slammed in 9 innings. Our fathers tried to balance the checkbook in ways that allowed for 5 days at the beach and school clothes. Our fathers were alcoholics and heavy drinkers, born again Christians and habitual liars. They worked as insurance salesmen, electricians, ambulance drivers, pharmaceutical sales reps, cooks and bartenders, store managers and line supervisors, factory grunts. They were former bar owners who'd lost bars to drink. They were wife beaters, great cheaters, teetotalers, big time Catholics, Protestants who tithed. They shoveled snow from their neighbors' driveways when their neighbors turned too old to shovel snow. In interviews, our father said, "Well, I guess so," and shrugged at men with MBAs who asked, "What are your strengths?" Our fathers had more interviews for worse jobs, and still they went. Our fathers were ex jocks who wanted football scholarships to big time universities for their sons. They were high school graduates or GED certificate earners, trade school standouts, Army veterans who did not talk. They threw hammers that whizzed by their children's heads, took off their belts to make a point, kicked ass from their favorite recliner, knew the difference between a punch and a backhand, and thought daily of choking their wives. And oh, how they loved us all. They loved us in the morning over coffee and silence, at night over beer, on the weekend with the job to do, the grass, the shrubs, the fence, the paint. They loved us with homes made of bricks, backyards, balls, bats, shoes, endless groceries, new used bicycles, and the desire to get away, keys to cars with V8 engines, a neighborhood where you wouldn't get shot. And they said, "Go the fuck to school." And they said, "Go to fuck to school." Now they grow old and tired and mellow and say, "I love you," and wait endlessly to be touched. Fathers, you have nothing to be ashamed of. You probably did not beat us enough. I'll read a couple poems from my book that's coming out on Roadside that I'm super excited about. The cover by Lou Ickes, cover painting by Lou Ickes. Michelle makes the most beautiful books from the artwork. This is a short one called The Poetry Place. I wanted to tell you I'm writing in form. It's what poets do. They announce forms in case you don't notice them, which is to say, you didn't praise the poet enough for writing in form. This line is about yay long. This line is a little longer than that line. Welcome to Fuckheadville. I'm going to finish up with a long poem or longish poem, I guess, um, about Fred Voss, who passed away recently. And I know a lot of people in the small press admire Fred, and I certainly did. When I was a senior in college, when just falling in love with poetry, I lived in a one room that was a transient hotel. So it was like me, old man with someone coming to collect childhood or child support payments, another old man, just so that I was the only student there. And one day I ordered Fred's book, Jones' book, and a Jerry Loughlin book over the phone. And I was so excited. I've been reading small press books, and my credit card got rejected, and I had to get a money order like a week later to get the books. So I've been reading Fred's poems for a long time, and it was really sad to see him pass and thinking a lot about Joan. So this is called Wilmerding, Pennsylvania, thinking of Fred Voss. The houses are being foreclosed on, but the kids are still in the streets, playing with chalk, riding bikes. And the old men sit outside a cafe, drinking coffee, waiting for the bars. And I'm walking here because I have been unemployed for 2 months. And what I can afford is the YMCA to lift some weights or swim, then walk the cracked sidewalks outside. And I remember reading Fred Voss's poems in my tiny apartment when I was 21 or 22. All those wonderful lines about working as a machinist up and down the coast of California and inside Goodstone Aircraft Company, that awful place with sparks flying and sharp objects and bosses welded down to the meanest of hearts. And I remember thinking, Jesus, I hope I don't end up like Fred. how beautifully he wrote, how hard he worked. Fred dropped out of a PhD program to become a machinist, but I was going to graduate school, so I didn't have to work with my hands because there were no jobs working with your hands in Western Pennsylvania in 1989. And because my mom never made college, and my dad, a factory worker who'd been employed since he'd quit school in the sixth grade to load melons, dreamed better things for his kids, like becoming an engineer or an accountant, but definitely not graduate school for poetry. But the directions drive us, not vice versa. We end up where we end up, not where we want. I wanted to teach college, but no one liked my poems about working as a janitor and taking drugs and reading to Connor Perra in the parking lot before work with a ham sandwich in my lap. And my professors thought I was unintelligent, not academic, and or a heroin addict. Plus, I once showed up to a party with a 3-gallon ball of beer, and everyone else brought hummus. So I graduated in 2 years with the same grades as everyone else. Most of my peers got jobs teaching, but I got a job in a warehouse where I loaded ball bearings into a truck and delivered them to factories and read more poems by Fred Voss, who was still a machinist, who was still a machinist, who was still writing poems, who was the only poet in America, who was the only poet in America who could have survived in Wilmerding, Pennsylvania, circa 1870, when George Westinghouse opened the Westinghouse Air Brake Company and the men worked 55 hours a week with steel made to stop a locomotive. And I like to think of Fred and the fire burning with the men who had to burn because he wanted to burn, because he knew someone needed to record this. How practical poetry is in the hands of a machinist, how you can still build your life around poetry when it's made by people who make things we need. But it's 150 years after George Westinghouse opened the airbag plant, and the black smoke looked like clouds and prosperity. And now the city is a hologram of itself. Factories looking like factories, but not doing what factories do. And I have been reading Fred's poems again, terrified and in awe, thankful and humbled. But this afternoon, it's 90 degrees, and I have my own work, my heart pumping past the railroad line that hauls coal somewhere away from Wilmerding, Pennsylvania, where Fred Voss never lived or worked, and a dog on a chain barks vicious at a torn black garbage bag, and two guys covered with tattoos head up a ladder carrying shingles. Thanks, everybody.